I stood at the edge of the freshly dug grave, watching the workers lower the mahogany coffin into the earth. The autumn wind pulled at my black dress, but I didn't move. My face was calm, composed, the face of a grieving sister. Inside that polished box, buried 6 feet below where anyone would think to look, my sister Elena wasn't dead. She was very much alive, and she was running out of air. The workers glanced at me with sympathy as they began shoveling dirt onto the coffin. I nodded solemnly, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. They had no idea that Elena had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to fake her own death, to frame me for her murder, to steal everything I had built. They didn't know that I had discovered her plan 3 days before she intended to die. They didn't know that I had simply let her go through with it, with one small modification. I had sealed the coffin myself this morning before anyone arrived. Double-locked, reinforced. The air holes she'd carefully drilled into the bottom, the ones that would have kept her alive until her accomplice dug her up tonight, I'd filled those with industrial sealant yesterday. The first shovelful of earth hit the coffin with a hollow thump. I thought I heard something from below, a muffled sound. Probably my imagination. I stayed until the grave was completely filled, until the workers patted down the soil and offered their condolences. I thanked them quietly, my voice steady and soft. The perfect picture of restrained grief. Only when I was alone did I allow myself the smallest smile. This time, Elena, you won't crawl out of the grave you dug for yourself. In my first life, I didn't see it coming. Elena was my half-sister, born 3 years after me to our father's second wife after my mother died. From the moment she entered our home, she was the sun around which everything revolved. Beautiful, charming, bright-eyed, she could make anyone love her within minutes. Our father doted on her. His business partners adored her. Even the household staff preferred her company to mine. I didn't mind at first. I was 14 when she was born, old enough to help care for her, and I genuinely loved the tiny baby who reached for me with such trust. I changed her diapers, sang her to sleep, helped her take her first steps. She called me Liv Liv before she could pronounce Olivia. I thought we would always be close. I was so incredibly naive. As Elena grew, I began to notice small things. Toys that went missing from my room and appeared in hers. Father's attention shifting away whenever I tried to share my achievements. My stepmother, Catherine, whispering in Elena's ear, and both of them glancing at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. By the time Elena was 10 and I was 23, the pattern was unmistakable. Anything I accomplished, she diminished. Any relationship I formed, she infiltrated. Any dream I shared, she claimed as her own. When I was accepted to medical school with a full scholarship, Father announced at dinner that he was so proud of Elena's excellent grades that year. My acceptance letter sat on the table between us, but he never looked at it. When I brought home James, the man I thought I would marry, Elena befriended him. Within 6 months they were dating. Within a year, engaged. She was 17, he was 26. It should have been wrong in every way. But Father paid for their lavish wedding and gave James a position at his company. I said nothing. I smiled at their wedding. I swallowed the humiliation and told myself that family was more important than my pain. That was my first mistake, believing that silence would protect me. My second mistake was succeeding anyway. Despite everything, I finished medical school. I specialised in cardiothoracic surgery. I was good, exceptionally good. By 30, I had my own practice. By 32, I'd performed several groundbreaking procedures that caught national attention. I published papers, I gave lectures, I built something that was entirely mine, that even Elena's charm and Father's favouritism couldn't touch. Or so I thought. Elena was 29 then, married to James, but increasingly bitter that her lifestyle, funded by Father's company, which was struggling, couldn't match the wealth I'd earned through my own work. She had the looks, the husband, Father's love, but I had independence. I had respect in my field. I had money I'd earned myself. She couldn't stand it. That's when she began her final play. It started with small rumours, whispers at medical conferences that I'd made mistakes in surgery, anonymous complaints to the medical board about my practices, patients who suddenly claimed I'd been negligent, though their stories never quite matched their medical records. I fought each accusation, proved each one false, but mud sticks even when you wash it away. My reputation began to erode. Then came the night that destroyed everything. A patient died on my table, a 78-year-old man with severe coronary disease. His surgery was high risk from the start. I'd told his family there was only a 40% chance of success. They'd begged me to try anyway. When he didn't survive, they were devastated. I was devastated. But it wasn't malpractice. It was the cruel mathematics of medicine. Except Elena had befriended his daughter-in-law months earlier, and that daughter-in-law filed a lawsuit claiming I'd been drinking before surgery, that I'd made reckless decisions, that I'd essentially murdered her father-in-law for the surgical fee. The medical board investigated. They found the bottle of wine in my office locker, the one I never drank, the one someone had planted there. They found the falsified surgical notes in my files, notes I'd never written, in handwriting that looked just similar enough to mine. They found 3 nurses willing to testify they'd smelled alcohol on my breath that day. Nurses Elena had befriended over the previous year. I lost my medical license. I lost my practice. I lost everything I'd built over 15 years of brutal work and sacrifice. The lawsuit took everything else. My savings, my house, my car. I moved into a tiny apartment in a part of the city where car alarms sang all night. Father never asked if the accusations were true. He simply said, "You've always been reckless, Olivia. This was inevitable." Elena visited me once in that apartment. She stood in my empty living room, looked around with theatrical pity and said, "Oh, Liv, I'm so sorry this happened to you. If you need anything at all, you know James and I are here for you." Her eyes were cold and satisfied. I knew then. I knew she'd orchestrated all of it. But I had no proof, no way to fight back, no energy left to try. I spent the next 2 years working as a night shift clerk at a pharmacy, living on instant noodles, watching my life become smaller and smaller. Depression settled over me like concrete. Some mornings I couldn't get out of bed. Some nights I stood on my apartment balcony and wondered if the fall would be enough. Then came the day Elena visited again. She swept into my apartment like she owned it, all designer clothes and expensive perfume. She didn't come alone. She brought James, a lawyer, and a social worker. Liv, she said softly, "we're worried about you. Father's worried. You're not well. We think you need help." I stared at her. "I'm fine. I'm managing." "You're not managing," James said, his voice dripping with false concern. "You're barely surviving. We want to help you. We found a facility." "A mental health facility," Elena interrupted gently. "Just for a little while, until you're yourself again." I looked at the social worker who smiled sympathetically, at the lawyer who held papers, at Elena whose eyes gleamed with triumph. They were going to commit me, have me declared mentally incompetent, take control of the small amount of money I had left, my mother's inheritance, the one thing Elena couldn't touch while I was of sound mind. "No," I said, "absolutely not." "Olivia," the social worker said kindly, "we have documentation of your mental decline. Your former colleagues have expressed concerns. Your father has signed statements. This is for your own good." "You can go voluntarily," the lawyer added, "or we can pursue involuntary commitment. Either way, you're getting the help you need." I looked at Elena. She smiled. That night, I took every sleeping pill in my apartment. I wrote a note saying I couldn't fight anymore, that I was sorry for failing everyone, that maybe they were right about me all along. I closed my eyes, expecting to never open them again. Instead, I woke up in a hospital bed. They had pumped my stomach, saved my life. Elena was there, crying prettily for the nurses, holding my hand. "Oh, Liv," she whispered when we were alone. "You couldn't even do this right." I spent 6 months in the psychiatric facility. When I got out, Father had passed away. His will left everything, the company, the house, all his assets, to Elena. I received nothing. The will stated that due to my mental instability and poor judgment, I was not fit to manage any inheritance. I learned later that Elena had changed the will herself months before Father's death, during one of his hospital stays for pneumonia. She'd forged his signature, but I couldn't prove it. I couldn't prove anything. I lived 3 more years in poverty and obscurity. Elena thrived. She sold Father's company for millions, bought a mansion, travelled the world with James, posted photos of their perfect life on social media. Sometimes she'd send me money, small amounts, just enough to be patronising. The notes always said, "Thinking of you, Liv, hope you're well." I died at 42. A brain aneurysm, sudden and catastrophic. I collapsed in my pharmacy, between the pain relievers and the cough medicine. My last thought was that at least it was finally over. Except it wasn't. I woke up in my childhood bedroom, in my 14-year-old body, the day before Elena was born. The morning sun poured through my window, and for several minutes I simply lay there, my heart pounding, my mind racing through impossibilities. I looked at my hands, young, unmarred, with nails I'd painted pink the night before. I looked at my walls, covered with posters of bands I'd forgotten I loved. I looked at my school uniform hanging on the chair. I was 14 again, and I remembered everything, every betrayal, every humiliation, every loss, the entire trajectory of a life spent being slowly erased by someone I'd loved. I got up, walked to my mirror, and stared at my young face. I looked so innocent, so trusting, so stupid. Not this time. This time I knew what Elena would become. I knew Catherine's poison. I knew Father's weakness. I knew James's greed. This time I wouldn't be the victim. This time I would be the one who buried them all. I didn't rush. That was the difference between the old Olivia and the new one. The old Olivia reacted emotionally, tried to fight battles as they came, exhausted herself struggling against tides she didn't understand. The new Olivia understood that real power comes from patience and preparation. When Elena was born, I played my role perfectly. I cooed over her, helped with her care, gave Father and Catherine no reason to suspect I was anything but the devoted older sister. But I watched. I listened. I learned. I noticed how Catherine whispered to Father, planting seeds of comparison. Elena smiled at me today. She's so advanced for her age. Don't you think she's special? I noticed how Father's eyes would light up differently for Elena than they ever had for me. I noticed the subtle ways Catherine ensured Elena received the best of everything, while my needs were quietly deprioritized. I said nothing. I smiled. I played the good daughter. But I started keeping records. I documented every conversation, every slight, every financial decision. I kept copies of Father's business documents, the ones he carelessly left in his study. I befriended his secretary and learned about his meetings, his partners, his dealings. I was 14, then 15, then 16. Just a studious girl interested in her father's work. Nobody suspected I was building a map of every weakness in his empire. I threw myself into my studies, but this time with strategy. I maintained perfect grades, but I didn't pursue medicine. Instead, I studied business and finance. I took every advanced placement course. I graduated early. I got into Harvard Business School at 17, with scholarships and grants that didn't require Father's money. By the time I was 21, Elena was 8 and already showing the charming manipulation I remembered. She'd come into my room during my college breaks, her eyes wide and innocent, and ask, Liv, why don't you come home more? Don't you love us? Of course I do, I'd say, hugging her. I'm just very busy with school. Father says you think you're too good for us now. Father is wrong, I'd reply gently. I'm building something important. You'll understand when you're older. She'd look at me with an expression I recognised. Confusion that her manipulation wasn't working. Calculation about what to try next. I'd smile and ruffle her hair. Want me to teach you about business? You're so smart, Elena. Maybe you'd be good at it too. Her face would brighten, and she'd nod enthusiastically. I'd spend hours teaching her about stocks, investments, company structures. She loved the attention. She absorbed the information. She had no idea I was teaching her just enough to make her dangerous to herself later. When I was 23, the same age I'd been when I'd met James in my first life, I met him again. Same coffee shop, same situation. He spilled coffee on my laptop, apologised profusely, offered to buy me a new one. He was just as handsome as I remembered. Just as charming. I'm so sorry, he said, his eyes doing that thing where they seemed to see only me. Please, let me make this up to you. Dinner? I smiled warmly. That's not necessary. Accidents happen. I insist. I'm James, by the way. Olivia. We talked for an hour. He was witty, attentive, perfect. He asked me about my studies, my dreams, my family. He seemed genuinely interested in everything I said. I knew it was all performance. I knew he was a social climber looking for a connection to money. In my first life, he dated me to get close to Father's business network, then traded up to Elena when he realised she was the favoured daughter. This time, I had different plans for him. I dated him for 3 months. I was warm, but never vulnerable. Interested, but never invested. I brought him home for dinner, introduced him to Father and Catherine, and 10-year-old Elena. Elena was instantly fascinated by him. He was handsome, older, sophisticated. She followed him around the house, asked him questions, giggled at his jokes. She was only 10, but I could see the seeds of infatuation. Perfect. After dinner, I told James I didn't think we were compatible for a long-term relationship. You're wonderful, I said kindly, but I'm focused on my career right now. I don't think I can give you what you need. He protested, but I was firm. We parted amicably. 2 weeks later, I heard from Catherine that James had called the house asking about me. Elena had answered the phone. I smiled. Over the next 2 years, I built my business empire. I used my knowledge from my first life, which companies would succeed, which investments would pay off, which real estate would explode in value. I made small, careful investments that grew into larger ones. By 25, I was wealthy. By 27, I was very wealthy, and I didn't tell Father any of it. As far as he knew, I was working at a mid-level management position at a consulting firm. I lived modestly, drove a regular car, wore simple clothes when I visited home. I let him think I was doing fine, but nothing spectacular. Meanwhile, I was building something he couldn't touch. Elena, now 14, was developing exactly as I remembered. Beautiful, charming, manipulative. Catherine had trained her well in the art of being adored. Father gave her everything she wanted. She was the princess of our household. She also started dating James. He'd stayed in touch with the family after our breakup, cultivating Father as a business connection. When Elena turned 14, he began paying special attention to her. Father thought it was sweet, a family friend taking interest in his daughter's education and future. I thought it was perfect. I said nothing when James started dating her at 15. I raised no concerns when, at 16, she declared they were in love. I smiled supportly when, at 17, they announced their engagement. At the engagement party, Eleanor found me in the garden. She was radiant in her designer dress, her ring catching the light. Liv, she said, are you happy for me? Of course, I said warmly. James is exactly what he seems to be. She studied my face, looking for jealousy or pain. Finding none confused her. You dated him first, she said carefully. Briefly, years ago, I realised quickly we weren't right for each other. But you're not upset that he chose me? Elena, I said gently, taking her hands. I want you to be happy. If James makes you happy, then I'm glad. She searched my eyes for sarcasm or hidden meanings. I gave her only sisterly warmth. It unsettled her more than any anger would have. They married when she was 18. Father gave James a senior position in the company, just as I remembered. James moved into the family home with Elena. They were the golden couple, perfect in every way, and Father's company, which I knew was already in trouble, began its steady decline. I watched from a distance. I visited for holidays, brought appropriate gifts, played the role of supportive older sister. I listened to Father complain about business challenges, nodded sympathetically, offered surface-level advice that I knew he wouldn't take. I didn't offer to help. I didn't try to save him. I let him sink. When Elena was 20, Father's company was on the brink of bankruptcy. James, I learned through my sources, had been embezzling funds. Small amounts at first, then larger. He'd set up shell companies, falsified records, redirected payments. He was good at it. Not good enough to hide it from someone who knew what to look for. I documented everything, every transaction, every falsified record, every secret account. I had investigators gather evidence. I built a case that would destroy him legally and professionally. And I did nothing with it, not yet. Instead, I did something else. I started anonymous rumours in Father's business circles about his company's instability. I ensured certain creditors heard about the financial troubles. I made sure investors got nervous. Father's company collapsed within 6 months. He lost everything: the business, the house, most of his savings. He was devastated. Catherine was furious. Elena was shocked. James immediately filed for divorce. I can't be tied to this financial disaster, he told Elena coldly. It'll ruin my career prospects. She begged him to stay. She cried, pleaded, promised things would get better. He left anyway, taking half their marital assets with him. Elena came to my apartment that night. I'd never told her where I lived, but she'd found me somehow. She stood in my doorway, makeup smeared from crying, looking lost. Liv, she whispered. Everything's gone. Father lost everything. James left me. I don't know what to do. I let her in, made her tea, let her cry on my sofa. I'm sorry, I said softly. I know this is hard. Do you have any money? Anything you could lend us? Father is too proud to ask, but I have some savings, I lied, but nothing like what Father needs. I can give you a few thousand to help get you back on your feet. Her face fell. She'd been hoping I was secretly wealthy, ready to save them all. That's all. I'm sorry, Elena. I wish I could do more. She left that night disappointed and desperate. I went back to my real apartment, the penthouse across town that no one in my family knew about, and poured myself wine. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Over the next 3 years, Father struggled to rebuild. He took a job at a company owned by his former rival, accepting a position far below what he'd once held. Catherine had to go to work for the first time in her life. Elena, now 23, worked as a receptionist and lived in a studio apartment. They thought they'd hit bottom. They had no idea how much further they could fall. I watched Elena during this time, studying how she responded to adversity. In my first life, she'd never faced real hardship. She'd built her schemes from a position of advantage. Now, struggling and desperate, she revealed her true nature even more clearly. She tried to reconnect with James. He blocked her number. She tried to leverage father's old connections. They didn't return her calls. She tried to charm her way into better jobs. Her reputation, tainted by father's business failure and James's embezzlement scandal, preceded her. Finally, she tried to reconnect with me. She started calling regularly, suggesting we get lunch, telling me she missed her sister. I accepted graciously. We met every few weeks. I listened to her troubles, offered sympathy, gave her small amounts of money when she asked. I became her lifeline. And I waited. At 26, Elena met someone new. Daniel, a wealthy businessman, older, divorced. He was legitimate, his money real. She pursued him with everything she had. Within months, they were dating seriously. She brought him to meet me at one of our lunches. He was polite, intelligent, genuinely seemed to care about her. I could see why. Elena, when she wanted to be, could make anyone feel like the centre of the universe. "Your sister is wonderful," Daniel told me. "So kind, so genuine." "She is," I agreed, smiling. Elena beamed. After he left to take a phone call, Elena leaned forward excitedly. "He's perfect, Liv. He's going to propose soon. I can feel it." "I'm happy for you," I said. "You deserve good things." "Finally," she breathed. "Finally, something is working out." She was right. Daniel proposed 2 months later. The wedding was planned for the following spring. Elena was radiant with relief and triumph. She'd escaped poverty, secured a wealthy husband, proven she could land on her feet. She thought she had won. Then I made my move. I reached out to Daniel privately, asked if we could talk about something important concerning Elena. He agreed, curious and slightly concerned. We met at an upscale restaurant. I arrived with a folder. "I need to show you something," I said. "I care about my sister, but I also care about honesty. And there are things about Elena's past, about my family, that you should know before you marry her." His expression grew serious. "What kind of things?" I showed him everything. Documents proving James's embezzlement from father's company, evidence that Elena had known about it, had helped cover it up, had benefited from it, records of debts Elena had taken out in other people's names, screenshots of messages where she discussed manipulating men for financial gain. Some of it was true. Some of it was true from my first life, manipulated to look current. Some of it was fabricated just believably enough. All of it was damning. "I'm not trying to ruin her happiness," I said softly. "But you deserve to know who you're marrying. Elena has struggled with honesty, with using people. I love her, but I can't let you walk into this blind." Daniel's face went pale, then hard. "Does she know you're telling me this?" No, she'd never forgive me. But my conscience couldn't let me stay silent. He studied the documents for a long time. Finally, he looked up. "Thank you for telling me. I need to think about this." "Of course," I said gently. "I'm sorry to be the one to burden you with it." He left the restaurant looking shattered. The wedding was called off 3 days later. Elena called me hysterical. "He broke up with me. He said I lied to him about my past, about James, about everything. Liv, I don't understand. I never told him any details about that time. How did he know?" "Oh, no," I said, infusing my voice with shock and sympathy. "What happened?" "Someone must have told him. Someone gave him information, but who? Who would do that?" "I don't know," I said softly. "Maybe someone from father's old company? Someone who wanted to hurt you?" She was crying so hard she could barely breathe. Everything was finally good again. Everything was finally working. And now, "I'm so sorry, Elena. Is there anything I can do?" "No," she choked out. "There's nothing anyone can do." After I hung up, I sat in my penthouse looking out over the city lights. It still wasn't enough. In my first life, Elena had taken everything from me slowly, methodically, over decades. She'd destroyed my career, my mental health, my dignity. She'd stolen my inheritance, my relationships, my future. Breaking her engagement was just the beginning. I needed to take everything, and I needed her to know I'd done it. Over the next year, I systematically dismantled what remained of Elena's life. I bought Father's old company, the shell of it that still existed, through a holding company. The rival who employed Father now reported to a board I controlled. I had Father demoted, then let go. I bought the building where Catherine worked, restructured, eliminated her position. I bought Eleanor's apartment building, raised her rent to just above what she could afford, waited for her to miss payments, evicted her. I did all of this through shell companies, anonymous entities, legal channels that couldn't be traced back to me. To my family, it looked like terrible luck, like the universe had turned against them. Elena moved back in with Father and Catherine. They were now living in a 2-bedroom apartment in a rough neighbourhood, all 3 of them squeezed together, working minimum wage jobs, barely surviving. I continued meeting Elena for lunch every few weeks. She'd lost weight, developed dark circles under her eyes. She was 27 but looked older, beaten down. "I don't understand what we did to deserve this," she said one afternoon, pushing her food around her plate. She'd ordered the cheapest item on the menu. "It's like we're cursed." "Life is hard sometimes," I said gently, "but you're strong. You'll get through this." "Will I?" She looked at me with hollow eyes. "I've been applying for jobs for months. Nothing. Every time something seems promising, it falls through. Every time I think we're about to catch a break, something else goes wrong." "Maybe you need a fresh start," I suggested. "Have you thought about moving to another city?" She laughed bitterly. "With what money?" "I could help," I offered. "I have some savings. Enough to get you set up somewhere new, help with first month's rent and deposits." Her eyes widened with desperate hope. "Really? Liv, would you really do that?" "Of course, you're my sister." She started crying right there in the restaurant. Thank you so much. You're the only one who hasn't given up on me." "I never will," I promised, squeezing her hand. 2 weeks later, I helped her move to Chicago. I paid for her apartment there, helped her get settled, connected her with job opportunities. Real ones this time. I wanted her to have hope. For 3 months, Eleanor's messages were almost happy. She'd found work at a marketing firm, made some friends, started dating someone. She sent me photos of her new apartment, her new life. "I think things are finally turning around," she texted. "Thank you for believing in me." Then I bought the marketing firm, and I had her fired for falsifying her credentials on her job application. Credentials she hadn't falsified, that I'd added to her file myself. Her new boyfriend left her when he heard about the firing. Her apartment was in a building I also owned. I had her evicted for lease violations. She called me sobbing. It happened again. Everything fell apart again. I lost my job, my apartment, everything. Liv, what's wrong with me? Why does this keep happening? "Where are you now?" I asked, concerned. "A shelter. I'm in a shelter. I've never..." Her voice broke. "I've never been this low." "Come home," I said firmly. "Come back to New York. Stay with me for a while. We'll figure this out together." "You'd let me stay with you?" "Of course. Family takes care of family." She arrived back in New York a week later, carrying everything she owned in 2 suitcases. I picked her up from the bus station, drove her to what she thought was my apartment, actually a modest 2-bedroom I maintained for appearances. She looked around the small space and I could see her thinking, "Olivia isn't doing much better than me. At least that's something." She stayed with me for 2 months. I made her feel safe, supported, loved. I helped her apply for jobs. I cooked meals for her. I let her cry on my shoulder about everything she'd lost. And I planted seeds. "You know what I think about sometimes?" I said one night over wine. "How different our lives could have been if Father had made different choices. If he hadn't spoiled you so much, maybe you'd have developed better skills. If he hadn't neglected me, maybe I'd have had the confidence to aim higher." Elena blinked. "He didn't spoil me." "Come on," I said gently. "You know he did. Everything you wanted, you got. The best clothes, the best schools, all of his attention. Well, I trailed off, shrugged. "That's not," she frowned. "That's not how I remember it." "Memory is funny," I said. "We remember what we want to remember." Another night. "Do you ever wonder if Catherine pushed you toward James because she wanted you to marry money, even though he was so much older than you?" "She didn't push me, I loved him." "You were 14 when you started dating him, Elena. 15 when the relationship got serious. Looking back, doesn't that seem wrong?" She was quiet for a long time. "I thought I was mature for my age. Or maybe you were manipulated by adults who should have protected you." I watched the doubt creep into her eyes. "On another evening, I've been thinking about our childhood. Do you remember my engagement to James?" She looked uncomfortable. "You dated him for a little while." "I was going to marry him. Before you..." "That's not... You were never engaged." "I was. He proposed. I said yes. Then he met you and suddenly he wasn't sure anymore. Don't you remember? You were 10. "No," she said slowly. "That's not what happened." "Isn't it?" I tilted my head. "I remember it clearly. He chose you, and Father was so happy about it." I could see her trying to reconcile her memories with what I was telling her. Doubt and confusion warred across her face. I was rewriting her history, making her question everything she thought she knew. After 3 months, I told her I'd found her a job opportunity. "A friend of mine runs a pharmaceutical company. They need someone in their communications department. I recommended you." Her face lit up. "Really? Live, thank you." "There's just one thing," I said carefully. "The background check is very thorough. If there's anything in your past that might come up, anything at all, you should tell them up front. Be honest about the James situation, about any financial issues. Honesty goes a long way." She nodded eagerly. "Of course. Complete honesty. I can do that." The pharmaceutical company was real. The job offer was real. And when Elena was honest about her past, as I'd encouraged, they rescinded the offer immediately. She was devastated. "They said my history showed a pattern of poor judgment and ethical concerns," she told me hollow-eyed. "You said honesty would help." "I'm so sorry," I said, holding her while she cried. "I thought it would." That's when Elena started to break. Not all at once, but in pieces. I'd see her staring at nothing, her eyes unfocused. She stopped sleeping, started talking to herself. Sometimes I'd hear her in the bathroom, crying quietly so she thought I wouldn't hear. "Maybe I should just disappear," she said one night, more to herself than to me. "Just vanish. Start over somewhere where nobody knows me." I looked up from my book. "What do you mean?" "Nothing." She shook her head. "I'm just tired." But I'd planted the seed, and I knew Elena well enough to know what would come next. A few days later, she asked me a strange question. If something happened to me, if I died, would Father get any money, life insurance or anything? "You don't have life insurance," I said. "But if I did, hypothetically..." "Why are you asking this?" "I'm just thinking," she said vaguely, "about options." I understood. In her desperate, broken state, Elena was considering the only con she had left, faking her own death. Probably for insurance money she'd take out on herself. with father as the beneficiary. One last scheme to help her family, to be the hero, to escape her current hell. It was exactly what I'd been waiting for. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Elena research. I saw the browser history on the shared laptop, searches for life insurance policies, fake death schemes, starting over with a new identity. I saw her make calls she thought were private, asking questions about policies and payouts. She was planning it carefully. I had to give her credit for that. I waited until she'd set everything in motion. Waited until she'd taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy with father as beneficiary. Waited until she'd arranged for an accomplice, some desperate fool she'd found online who'd help her fake a death scene and then dig her up later that night for a cut of the insurance money. Waited until she'd bought the coffin, a cheap one but sturdy enough. She'd drilled air holes in the bottom, tested the locks from inside. She'd planned to be found dead in her apartment from an apparent overdose, have me identify the body in my grief, attend the funeral, and then be dug up by her accomplice after dark. The plan had one fatal flaw. She'd told me about it. Not directly. Elena wasn't that stupid. But she'd left her notes out just carelessly enough. She'd made phone calls just loudly enough. She'd wanted me to know, I realised, wanted to give me a chance to either help or stay silent, a test of loyalty. I'd stayed silent, and I'd made my own arrangements. The morning before her planned death, I went to visit her accomplice, a man named Derek who lived in a basement apartment and owed money to several dangerous people. I'd found him easily enough. Eleanor's operational security was amateur at best. Elena sent me, I'd said when he answered the door. There's been a change of plans. I'd handed him an envelope containing $50,000 in cash. This is more than she was going to pay you. All you have to do is nothing. Don't answer her calls tonight. Don't go to the cemetery. Just take this money and disappear for a month. He'd stared at the money, then at me. What happens to her? That's between sisters, I'd said calmly. He'd taken the money. Then I'd gone to the funeral home Elena had arranged to use, and paid extra to ensure they'd use a specific coffin, one I'd personally modified. The air holes were sealed, the locks reinforced, and most importantly, I'd added my own special touch, a small valve on the inside that looked like an emergency release, but actually did nothing at all. Let Elena think she had a way out if something went wrong. She didn't. The day of her staged death, everything went according to her plan. She took the pills, carefully measured to seem like an overdose, but not actually be fatal. She called me, her voice weak and slurred, saying goodbye. I'd arrived at her apartment to find her unconscious. I'd called 911, ridden in the ambulance, watched them try to revive her at the hospital, watched them pronounce her dead. I'd cried, I'd collapsed, I'd been the devastated sister. And when they asked if I wanted to see the body before they took it away, I'd said yes. I'd stood beside the gurney, looking down at Eleanor's still face, her eyes closed, her breathing so shallow it was undetectable. I leaned down as if to kiss her forehead. I know, I'd whispered, so quietly only she could hear. I know everything, and I'm going to make sure you stay buried. Her eyes had snapped open for just a fraction of a second. Shock and horror and understanding all at once. Then I'd straightened, wiped my tears, and left the room. Now, standing at the grave as the last of the dirt was shoveled into place, I thought about everything Elena had taken from me in my first life. My career, my love, my inheritance, my dignity, my will to live. She had buried me alive in poverty and shame, and watched me suffocate slowly over years. This was faster, more merciful in a way. The workers finished, offering their final condolences. I thanked them and watched them leave. The cemetery was empty except for me and the fresh grave. I stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. Somewhere below, Elena was clawing at the coffin lid, trying the emergency valve that didn't work, screaming into darkness that no one would hear. She'd have perhaps an hour of air left, maybe 2 if she stayed calm. But Elena had never been good at staying calm under pressure. I imagined her terror, her disbelief, her understanding as the oxygen ran out, that I had orchestrated everything, that I'd known about her plan all along, that I'd let her build her own grave and then locked her inside it. I imagined her final thoughts would be of me, her Liv, who'd taken care of her as a baby, who'd supported her through her hardships, who'd given her money and shelter and love, who'd been waiting 30 years for this moment. My phone buzzed, a message from my assistant. The documents have been filed. Your father's assets have been seized to cover his debts to your holding companies. Catherine's employment termination is complete. Both have been served eviction notices. I typed back, thank you. Ensure they're processed by end of week. Father and Catherine would spend their remaining years in poverty, wondering what they'd done to deserve such misfortune. They'd never know their golden daughter hadn't died of despair. She'd died of ambition. They'd never know their neglected older daughter had become the architect of their destruction. They'd never know I'd won. I turned to leave the cemetery, but paused at the gate, turned back one last time to look at the grave. You taught me an important lesson, Elena, I said softly to the turned earth. You taught me that family doesn't mean anything if there's no loyalty behind it, that love is just a word people use to manipulate each other, that the only person you can trust is yourself. A breeze moved through the cemetery, rustling the leaves of nearby trees. Thank you for that. I walked through the gates and didn't look back. My driver was waiting with the car, the real one, the luxury sedan that reflected my actual wealth. I slid into the back seat, and he pulled away smoothly. As we drove through the city streets toward my penthouse, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked calm, peaceful even. There was no guilt in my eyes, no remorse. Elena had spent her whole life burying people with her charm and manipulation, never facing consequences. She'd believed she was untouchable, that her beauty and father's love would always save her. She'd been wrong. I didn't destroy her with revenge. I didn't need grand confrontations or dramatic reveals. I simply let her destroy herself the way she had tried to do to me. I just made sure that this time, when she dug her grave, she was the one who stayed in it. My phone buzzed again. My real assistant this time, reminding me about tomorrow's board meeting for my company. 1 of 3 I now controlled. I had a full schedule. Meetings with investors, a charity gala I was hosting, a television interview about my success as a self-made businesswoman. Life went on. My life, built from nothing, buried under no one. I'd learned the hard way that sometimes the only way to survive is to become untouchable. Not through cruelty, but through careful calculation. Not through revenge, but through patience. Elena had wanted to bury me. Instead, she taught me how to bury her. And as the city lights blurred past my window, I realised I felt nothing at all about what I'd done. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just a quiet sense of completion. The grave was sealed, the debt was paid, and I was finally perfectly free.